The Winnipeg Jets are off to a perfect 8-0-0 start, but how good is this team for the long haul? Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets joins us to talk about that and what's the reasons behind this team's strong start next on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host among our network who has to be the happiest right now with the way his team is playing, Harrison Lee of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. And Harrison, 8-0-0, can't start any better than that. What are some of the biggest reasons for this team's early success?
Well, the Jets are a really interesting team so far this year. Still getting a handle on exactly what kind of team they are because, there's definitely some areas where they're super, super strong and some where, there's what I would call room for improvement. That's a really generous way of saying it in some ways. But the best thing about this team is definitely the special teams. And it's not just the power play. I know the power play is like near 40%. Might have dropped a little bit after yesterday's game, but still operating at a pretty crazy clip. But the PK actually is doing pretty well as well. I think they're around 85-ish%. And it's not just the goalie bailing them out. It just seems like they're more aggressive. They've made life a lot harder for power play units. And so that's really what we've been asking for. And even last night, we actually had our first shorthanded goal of the season. And it was because we had a power kill with Kyle Connor on it. Instead of using our usual third and fourth liners, the Jets are trying to use more skill there, and it actually led directly to a goal. So that's pretty nice. Having threats all up and down your team is great, especially on the power play and PK, because those were two areas where the Jets have basically been bottom of the league the last few years. So we haven't really had a power play this good since we had Line A, and that is, at this point, ancient history. So nice to see that working well. Hellebuyck has also been really good. He's not starting as many games as he did last year through the first couple of games, which is nice. Comrie's already had 2 starts, which, hey, that's pretty great. You're supposed to use your backup a little more. He's a little iffy, but, most goalies this year are, well, not great. I think the league average is under 900 this year or something like that. So
yeah,
it's been a bit rough if you're the man in net, but not for Helly. He's always just fantastic. So never a worry there. The last thing that I think has really been good is certainly the third and fourth lines, especially the Lowry line. Now they're actually more like the second line, but everyone calls them the best third line in hockey. So I guess we'll just stick to it. But we all know that they play like second line minutes. So they've been really helping us out where some of the skill lines have maybe struggled a bit more than I think a lot of us were hoping.
You do have a lot of scoring depth right now. 8 players on this roster are at a point a game or better. Who has been the biggest surprise early this season that has helped lead this team to an 8-0 start?
There's a couple of candidates. I'm going to give one that probably won't get a lot of credit, but I think deserves it. Neil Pionk this year has been a lot better than he's been in previous years. And defensively, you still get the same Neil Pionk. He'll still have some missed assignments. He had one game, I think, against the Kraken the other day where he was basically involved in every goal, both positive and negative. He had some pizzas that he probably would like back that got turned into goals against, but then he also had some game-winning moments, including a drawn penalty in overtime. So all sorts of fun, funky stuff that just happens when you're Neil Pionk. But he's been allowed to be really offensively ambitious this year, and having Sandberg as his partner, who's a little bit better at tracking back than Brendan Dillon was, I think just lets him feel like he can basically be his fourth forward self. When he doesn't have to worry about defense, he's a different kind of player. And he's been really fun. If there's one guy that I actually really root for, I know every team has like a bad defender or something. And in his case, I just feel like he's always been accountable for the fact that he struggles. And he's sort of talked about it in the past. And so seeing him have like a point per game pace so far, really couldn't happen to somebody that I was rooting for more.
You mentioned there are some areas this team you're still not sure about or they need to work on a little bit. What are some of those areas, and can they be improved?
Oh, boy. Yeah, so the top line continues to be just a bit of a black hole. Connor, Scheifele, and Velarde are just terrible together. I don't know how you take so much skill and make it not work, but that trio has been, their goal differential is terrible. Some of it's a little bit unlucky. They're not quite as bad as I think they've seemed at times, but they're like a -5 already on the season together. And, Velarde basically looks like he's a passenger, and I don't think it's just his own individual effort. I just think he's not really playing with a line that fits his style. Scheifele has, he's scoring a lot, but it's not really at even strength, and that's kind of a problem because that's where he has to win his matchups, and he really hasn't been. If there's anyone on that line that's actually been doing surprisingly well, it's Connor. He's been really defensively engaged. He's actually forced a couple of turnovers that turned into goals. And in yesterday's game, when he had a shorthanded effort, he actually outmuscled Blake Coleman, which I've never seen him do. Usually he gets pushed off the puck pretty easily and stuff, but this year it seems like he's a little more engaged. And, I really don't lump him in as much with the top line issues. This is like the first year that he's kind of had this stuff. So, not going to like rush to judgment and say it's going to happen for the rest of the year, but great to see him at least being really bought in. But that line is just, it's so bad because they play like 20 plus minutes a night, and it makes everyone else's job really hard if that top line isn't softening its matchups. And it really hasn't so far. There's been a couple of shifts where they've looked good, but yeah. And, with Vlad Nemesnikov trying to play 2C with Ehlers and Perfetti, that line has had some issues. It was worse to start. They've started putting 2 and 2 together, but I think, Nemesnikov has been less a driver of that than Ehlers and Perfetti are. But, at least right now, they're probably Winnipeg's best skill line, I guess, other than the Lowry line. So, it does seem like Arniel's keyed on that. He did play them a little more in the first period yesterday than the Scheifele line. So it's not just us that sees it. Arniel is also seeing it. He even benched him for one shift in the game prior. So they really need to figure that out, because if they can't get that line going and they're not really willing to change it, then you're going to have to start sheltering it, which I'm pretty sure the Jets are not going to do.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they don't want to go down that road. Harrison, how good do you think this team really is, and can they be contenders throughout the whole season, or is this just a hot start?
I think this team has the pieces to be a threat. You look at the West, and there's just not that many teams that are good. There's a couple that are like strong on paper, and maybe they've had good starts to the year. I think Dallas is one of the better teams. But you look around and, like, aside from Vegas, Dallas, and some of the usual suspects, even the Avs just aren't the same. Edmonton is slower and older and doesn't seem that good this year. There's just, when Calgary is leading the Pacific Division, clearly something's changed. And I know it's only 8 games in, but I think you're kind of seeing that there's going to be a lot of middle-of-the-pack squads that are good in some ways, but very flawed in others. And so I think for the Jets, I thought that they'd be more of a wild card team this year. It does seem like they have the special teams and goaltending to push more towards the top of the division. And if they ever figure out the top line stuff, at that point, the team is going to be in much better straits. If they can start winning their 5v5 stuff with their skill lines, it's game over for the rest of the conference. So the Jets are I'd say they're 3/4 of the way there. There's a lot that goes right for them, and the power play is not going to click along at 40% forever. But I still think this team has enough and could add at the trade deadline to be a pretty nasty team, at least a 1 or 2 series winning kind of team in the postseason. As far as Cup contender status is concerned, I'm not there yet. There's definitely still a lot that I need to see from this team. One thing I didn't get a chance to mention, but has clearly been really bad, is Morrissey and DeMello together have been one of the worst deep pairings I've seen on this team. And it's like bizarre because last year they were so good. So I don't know what's up with that. I don't know if it's just a short-term thing. But if that also continues to be a problem, it's going to really cap the Jets' ceiling. But, so far, trying to enjoy the ride and not think about the long term. But I do know that there's enough there to where you probably think in a playoff series, it might be hard for the Jets to advance without fixing a couple of these issues.
All right. Well, Harrison, I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, sure. I'm on X/Twitter at HLLivingLoco. Our show podcast Twitter is at LO_Winnipeg Jets. And our Locked On Winnipeg Jets podcast is available where Locked On NHL is, on YouTube, Spotify, all of your favorite podcasting platforms. Check us out there.
Harrison, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. Prize Picks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when my picks hit, I can get my money in as little as 15 minutes. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. So, again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.